in the heart of the old African village called Okuta, the smell of roasted corn mixed with the sound of distant drums. It was a village where everyone knew everyone, where children played in the dust and elders told stories under the big baobab tree. But among all the people in Okuta, one man stood out. His name was Baba Kura, the butcher, known across 3 villages not because of his skill, but because his meat was cheap. While other butchers charged heavy coins for a small cut of beef, Baba Kura sold large portions for almost nothing. The farmers loved him, the mothers blessed him, and the poor said he was a gift from the gods. Every dawn, before the sun touched the market, he would open his stall, his table filled with fresh red meat, shining as though it had just come from the cow. The village loved Baba Kura, but nobody ever asked the question that should have been asked. Where did all that meat come from? At first, it seemed like a blessing. Even the village chief would sometimes visit his stall and say with a laugh, "Baba Kura, you will feed us all one day." And Baba Kura would bow slightly, his wrinkled lips curling into a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He would always reply, "Ah, my chief, I only sell what the ancestors provide." But in the shadows of his smile hid something cold, and soon the gods themselves would reveal it. One hot afternoon, a young woman named Aisha, who sold vegetables beside his stall, began to notice strange things. Every morning before the cock crowed, Baba Kura would walk into the market alone, carrying heavy sacks on his shoulder. No one saw him buy cows, goats, or sheep. Yet by sunrise, his table would be full of fresh meat. Sometimes, when the wind blew, Aisha thought she smelled something odd. Not quite like beef, not like goat either. She asked him once, "Baba Kura, how do you sell your meat so cheap?" "What's your secret?" He laughed softly and said, "Ah, my daughter, the ancestors blessed me with plenty." But that night, Aisha couldn't sleep. Something about his eyes that morning, the way they avoided hers, haunted her. One night, under the bright moon, Aisha made a decision that would change the fate of Okuta forever. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, waited until the village fell silent, and then followed Baba Kura. She hid behind trees as he left his hut with one of those heavy sacks. His steps were slow but steady. He took the narrow path behind the market, the one that led into the forbidden forest, past the river no one dared cross after sunset. Aisha's heart pounded like a drum. The night was cold, and every step she took in the shadows made the dry leaves crackle beneath her feet. She crouched behind a thick iroko tree when Baba Kura finally stopped. Before her eyes, he dropped the sack on a large flat stone. Then he knelt, mumbling strange words that seemed older than the forest itself. The ground trembled softly, and from beneath the stone, a faint red glow rose. Aisha's hands shook. She bit her lip to stop herself from screaming. Baba Kura pulled something out of the sack, and though the moonlight was faint, she saw it clearly. It was not animal flesh. It was human. The butcher began to chant louder now, his voice trembling as he lifted his blood-stained knife toward the glowing ground. Then came a whisper, a voice, deep and ancient, answering him from below. Aisha's heart froze. She ran, branches cutting her arms as she fled through the forest, gasping for breath, not daring to look back. When she reached the village gate, she fell to her knees, trembling and crying. But who would believe her? At dawn, 2 villagers were missing, a child who went to fetch firewood and a hunter who never returned from the bush. The people cried and searched, but there was no trace. That same morning, Baba Kura's stall was full of meat again, more than ever. He even gave some away for free. The people said, "Ah, what a kind man." But Aisha knew the truth, and the truth was eating her alive. She went to the village chief, but he laughed gently and said, "Aisha, you have let your dreams frighten you." Baba Kura is an old man. He would never harm anyone. Then she went to Baba Ifa, the old priest who lived near the river. When she told him what she saw, his face turned pale. He said softly, "Child, you have seen what should not be seen. That man has traded his soul. His meat is not of animals. He feeds the spirits that hunger for blood." Aisha covered her mouth in horror. "Then what do we do, Baba?" The priest sighed deeply. "If he stops feeding them, the spirits will come for us all. But if he continues, we will all become his meat." That night, Baba Ifa and Aisha went together to the butcher's stall. The market was dark, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. They hid in the shadows as Baba Kura entered, humming to himself. He lit a small fire and began to sharpen his knife. The priest whispered, "When the spirits appear, do not move." Suddenly, Baba Kura dragged a sack into the room. It fell open, and a pale hand slipped out. Aisha gasped. The butcher froze, then slowly turned. His eyes were no longer human. They were pure white, glowing like the moon. He hissed, "You don't understand. They promised me wealth. They promised me meat forever. The dead feed the living." The priest stepped out from the shadows, raising his staff. "You have deceived your people and fed darkness with innocent blood. Tonight the spirits shall take what they gave." Baba Kura screamed, his voice echoing like thunder. The fire burst into red flame. From the floor, shadows rose, the souls of those he had killed, crying out in pain. They surrounded him, their wails filling the night. The priest raised his staff higher and chanted, "By the gods of light, return to dust what feeds on blood." A great wind roared through the stall. The flames turned white, then blue. Baba Kura's scream filled the air. And then silence. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but ashes and bones. By morning, the villagers gathered around the ruins of the butcher's hut. Aisha stood beside the priest as he told them what happened. At first, they refused to believe, but then they saw the ashes, and among them the faint outline of human skulls. There was no doubt. They buried what was left of Baba Kura under the old baobab tree. The priest spoke solemnly. "When a man gives too little for what is worth much, someone else pays the price." From that day on, no one in Okuta ever bought cheap meat again. Years passed. Aisha grew old. Children would gather under the baobab tree, and she would tell them the story of the cheap butcher, how greed can make a man trade his soul, how easy blessings can come with deadly costs, and how no secret stays buried forever. When she spoke, the wind would sometimes whisper through the leaves, and the people said it was Baba Kura's spirit, still begging for forgiveness. And so, the story of Baba Kura, the cheap butcher, became a warning told to every child in Okuta. Beware of gifts that seem too easy, for behind every cheap thing may hide a costly secret, because true wealth is not in money, or meat, or gold. It is in peace of heart and the blessing of clean hands. And if you ever hear the wind at night, whispering softly, "Eji Ogunmi," just close your door and pray the butcher isn't still hungry.